I found out my family had been gathering without me for months. Birthday dinners, barbecues, holidays. Everyone was there in the photos except me. Then one day, everything changed. The first time I realized something was wrong with my place in the family, it did not come from an argument. It came from a photograph. I remember the exact moment. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I was sitting alone in my apartment kitchen with a mug of coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. The kind of slow morning where nothing urgent is happening and your mind drifts between weekend plans and unfinished thoughts from the week before. I was scrolling through my phone without really paying attention. Then the photo appeared. My cousin Emily had posted it. The picture showed a long table covered with food. My parents were sitting in the middle of it, laughing about something. My sister Lauren leaned toward the camera with that same bright smile she always used in family pictures. There were bowls of salad, trays of barbecue, and a birthday cake with candles still burning. The caption was simple: family dinner for Mom's birthday. I stared at the photo for a long moment, because I had not known anything about that dinner. At first, I assumed there had been some kind of mix-up. Maybe the plans were made late. Maybe someone forgot to send me the message. Our family group chats had always been messy. Messages disappeared under piles of replies all the time. So I tried not to think much about it. Later that afternoon, I called my mom. I kept my tone casual, like it was no big deal. I asked how her birthday had gone and told her I hoped she had enjoyed the day. She said it had been nice. Just a small dinner with family. Her voice sounded normal. Relaxed. Nothing strange. I mentioned that I had seen the pictures online. There was a short pause. Then she said something that sounded completely reasonable. She said they assumed I was busy. I accepted that explanation. It made sense at the time. I even suggested we grab lunch later that week so I could celebrate with her properly. She said that sounded good. The conversation ended the way it always did. Calm. Uneventful. But the strange part was how the same situation kept repeating. A few weeks later, I saw another photo online. This time it was my Uncle Mark's backyard barbecue. My brother Kevin stood next to the grill with a beer in his hand. My dad was talking with two cousins near the patio. Someone had hung lights across the fence. It looked like a full family gathering. And again, I had not heard a single word about it. When I asked Kevin about it a few days later, he brushed it off. He said it had been thrown together quickly. Just a small thing. Nothing planned. The explanation sounded normal. But slowly, a quiet thought started forming in my mind. Because every time this happened, the excuse was the same. Plans made quickly. They thought I was busy. Nothing important. At first I believed it. But one evening, while looking at another photo from yet another gathering, something finally clicked. These events were not small. They were not last minute. They were planned. And somehow, every single time, I was the only person who did not know about them. That was the moment a strange realization settled in my chest. Maybe I was not being forgotten. Maybe I was simply not being invited. For a while, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Families forget people sometimes. Messages get lost. Plans change. Life moves quickly, and not everyone can attend every event. That was the story I told myself. Still, the small moments kept piling up. A few weeks after the barbecue, I opened social media one evening and saw another post. This time it was my cousin Daniel's birthday dinner. The photo showed nearly everyone gathered around a restaurant table. My parents were there. My sister Lauren was there. Even my Aunt Carol, who lived 2 hours away, had somehow made it. They were all smiling, leaning toward the cake as Daniel blew out the candles. I stared at that photo the same way I had stared at the first one, trying to remember if anyone had mentioned it. No message. No call. Nothing. A few days later, I ran into Lauren while visiting my parents' house. I kept my voice light and asked how Daniel's birthday dinner had been. She answered casually, like it was nothing worth discussing. She said the food was good and the restaurant had been crowded. Then she said something that sounded strangely familiar. She said they thought I was working that night. I nodded like it made sense. But inside, something started shifting. Because the strange part was not that I missed one event. The strange part was that I was missing all of them. Family birthdays, holiday dinners, Sunday cookouts, small gatherings that used to be routine. Every time I asked about them, the explanation sounded harmless. Someone assumed I was busy. The plans happened quickly. It was nothing special. But when you hear the same explanation over and over again, it stops sounding accidental. It starts sounding rehearsed. One evening I sat in my living room thinking about it. My phone was in my hand, and I was scrolling through months of photos that relatives had posted. The pattern was impossible to ignore. dinner tables filled with people, backyard gatherings, holiday decorations, group photos with everyone standing shoulder to shoulder. Everyone except me. The strangest part was that no one acted like anything was wrong. Whenever I talked to my parents or siblings, the conversations felt normal. No tension, no awkwardness, no apologies. It was like we were all pretending nothing had changed. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. Asking questions made me feel strange, like I was begging for an explanation that nobody wanted to give. So instead, I watched quietly. And once you start paying attention to something like that, you notice details you never saw before. You notice how family conversations start after you leave the room. You notice how plans suddenly become vague when you ask about the weekend. You notice how everyone else already seems to know things that were never mentioned to you. It took a while for the truth to settle in my mind. But one night, sitting alone in my apartment, I finally admitted something to myself that I had been avoiding. This was not forgetfulness. This was not coincidence. Somewhere along the way, my family had started gathering without me. And the worst part was that they were doing it so casually that it almost looked normal. But what I did not know yet was that the real reason behind it had nothing to do with scheduling. And when I finally discovered why they had slowly pushed me out of those gatherings, it would change everything I thought I knew about my own family. After a while, something inside me changed. At first, every time I saw another photo from a gathering I had not been invited to, I felt the same quiet sting. It was not anger exactly. It was more like confusion mixed with a kind of slow disappointment. You keep thinking there must be some explanation you are missing. Maybe people are busy. Maybe messages got lost. Maybe you misunderstood something. But eventually you reach a point where the explanations stop making sense. The moment that changed everything happened a few months later. It was December, just a few weeks before the holidays. I was standing in line at a grocery store when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw a post from my cousin Emily again. This time it was a group photo. The entire family stood together in front of a Christmas tree at my parents' house. The living room looked exactly the way it always did during the holidays. My mother had decorated the fireplace with the same red stockings she had used every year since I was a kid. Everyone was there. My parents, my sister Lauren, my brother Kevin, aunts, uncles, cousins, even relatives who rarely showed up for anything. I looked at the date on the post. It had been taken that same evening, while I was standing in a grocery store buying frozen dinners. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the screen while the line slowly moved forward. No one had told me about that gathering. Not a single message. Not even a casual mention. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a long time without starting the engine. Part of me wanted to call someone. I could have called my mom, or Kevin, or Lauren. I could have asked the question that had been sitting in my mind for months. Why did no one tell me? But another part of me already knew the answer would sound exactly like all the others. They thought I was busy. It happened quickly. It was nothing special. For the first time, I realized something important. If people truly want you somewhere, they make sure you know about it. They remind you. They check your schedule. They tell you weeks in advance. They do not forget you again and again by accident. That night, sitting in the dark parking lot, I made a quiet decision. I stopped asking. I stopped bringing up the photos. I stopped wondering whether I had missed a message. Instead, I started focusing on something else. My own life. I began working longer hours at the small engineering firm where I had been employed for a few years. The job had never been glamorous, but I was good at it. For the first time in a long while, I started putting real energy into building something for myself. Evenings that used to be open for family dinners slowly filled with other things. Gym sessions, networking events, late nights finishing projects, weekend hikes with coworkers who had slowly turned into friends. Little by little, my routine changed. And the strange thing was, the less I tried to stay connected with my family, the easier my life started to feel. But what I did not realize at the time was that while I was quietly building a new life, my family was still watching from a distance. They just were not paying attention. Not yet. And when they finally did notice what had changed, their sudden interest would come years too late. At first, focusing on my own life was not some grand plan. It was just something to fill the empty space. When family gatherings quietly disappear from your schedule, you suddenly have a lot more free time than you expected. Weekends that used to revolve around birthday dinners, barbecues, and holiday visits became quiet stretches of hours with nothing planned. So I started filling those hours. Work was the easiest place to start. I had been working at a small engineering firm for several years. It It was not the kind of company that people brag about at parties, but it was stable, and the work mattered. Most of the projects were practical things. Infrastructure planning, industrial equipment upgrades, efficiency designs for small manufacturing plants. Not glamorous, but real. For a long time I had treated the job like something temporary, something I might eventually move on from. But once my weekends opened up and my evenings stopped revolving around family dinners, I started giving it more attention. I stayed later at the office. I volunteered for projects other people avoided. I started asking questions about the business side of things instead of just doing the technical work. Little by little, people at the company began to notice. My manager, a quiet guy named Tom Harris, started trusting me with larger responsibilities. Instead of small design tasks, I was sitting in meetings with clients and helping plan entire project timelines. The work was challenging, but it felt good. There is a certain satisfaction that comes from building something piece by piece. Watching a plan move from sketches on a whiteboard to actual machinery running inside a factory. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was moving forward. Outside of work, my life slowly expanded in ways I had not expected. A coworker invited me to join a weekend hiking group. At first I almost declined. Social gatherings had started to feel exhausting after everything with my family. But I went anyway. The first hike was simple. Just a group of people walking along forest trails, talking about work, travel, random life stories. No complicated family history. No awkward questions about why I had missed the last gathering. Just normal conversation. I kept going back. Over time, those people became friends. Real friends. The kind who remember your birthday without needing a reminder. The kind who send a quick message just to see how you are doing. My routine slowly settled into something steady. Work during the week. Gym in the evenings. Hiking trips or dinners with friends on weekends. Months turned into years faster than I expected. During that time, my family stayed mostly silent. No sudden invitations. No questions about why I had stopped visiting as often. Occasionally, my mother would send a short message asking how work was going. My sister might comment on a photo if I posted something online. But the distance between us had quietly become normal. And honestly, I stopped thinking about it. I had a life that felt full. A career that was moving forward. Friends who actually showed up when they said they would. What I did not realize was that something else was also starting to change. Not in my family, but in my career. Because the small projects I had been taking on at work were about to lead to an opportunity that would quietly transform my entire future. And when that happened, it would be impossible for my family to ignore me anymore. The opportunity did not arrive with some dramatic announcement. There was no moment where someone burst into my office with exciting news or handed me a promotion on the spot. Instead, it started with a problem. One of our largest clients, a regional manufacturing company, had been struggling with a major equipment issue for months. Their production line kept slowing down because of an outdated system that no one seemed able to fix without replacing half the machinery. Replacing everything would have cost millions. So the company kept delaying the decision, hoping someone could find a better solution. One afternoon, Tom called me into his office. He closed the door, sat down behind his desk, and explained the situation. The client needed a redesign of the system, not a full replacement, but a creative solution that could extend the life of their existing equipment. Several engineers at the firm had already looked at the problem. No one had found a workable answer. Tom asked if I wanted to take a look at it. At first, I thought he was joking. The project was far larger than anything I had handled before. But Tom simply shrugged and said something I still remember clearly. He said sometimes a fresh set of eyes sees things that experienced people miss. So I started studying the problem. For weeks, my routine became simple. Work, sleep, work again. I spent late nights at the office studying system diagrams, running simulations, and sketching different configurations on whiteboards. Some ideas failed quickly. Others created new problems that made things worse. But eventually, a pattern started to appear. The problem was not the machines themselves. It was the way the entire system was connected. Once I realized that, the solution became clearer. Instead of replacing the equipment, we redesigned the flow of materials through the production line. A series of smaller adjustments changed how the machines interacted with each other. Individually, each change seemed minor. Together, they transformed the entire system. When we presented the plan to the client, I expected them to poke holes in it immediately. Instead, they asked how quickly we could start. The redesign ended up saving them an enormous amount of money. The production line ran more efficiently than it had in years. Within a few months, word of the project spread to other companies. Suddenly, our small firm was receiving calls from businesses facing similar problems. Tom pulled me into his office again one afternoon. This time he was smiling. He explained that the company wanted to build a new division focused on efficiency redesign projects. And since I had developed the original solution, they wanted me to help lead it. The offer came with something else. A partnership stake in the firm. I remember walking out of his office that day feeling strangely calm. There was no dramatic celebration. No sudden rush of excitement. Just a quiet realization. My life had changed. Over the next year, everything moved quickly. Our new division expanded. Projects multiplied. My responsibilities grew. Financially, things improved in ways I had never really expected. I bought a modest house near the edge of the city. Nothing flashy, just a quiet place with a small backyard and a home office. My life felt stable, comfortable, peaceful, and through all of it, my family remained distant. They had no idea what was happening. Not until one small piece of news began quietly circulating through relatives and social media. And once that news reached them, the silence that had lasted for years would suddenly disappear. The first message came from my cousin Emily. It arrived on a random Tuesday evening while I was finishing some paperwork at my kitchen table. I glanced at my phone and saw her name pop up on the screen. That alone felt unusual. Emily and I had not spoken directly in years. The last real conversation we had probably happened at a family Christmas dinner long before the quiet distance started. Her message was simple. She said she had heard something exciting about my work and wanted to congratulate me. At first, I did not understand what she meant. Then she mentioned the company article. Apparently, one of our recent projects had been featured in a regional business magazine. The article talked about how our firm had grown quickly over the past few years and mentioned the new efficiency division we had built. My name appeared in the interview. I had not thought much about it when the article came out. To me, it was just another piece of business publicity. But news travels quickly through extended families, especially when someone suddenly becomes successful. I thanked Emily for the message and thought that would be the end of it. It was not. Over the next few weeks, more messages started appearing. An old classmate sent a quick note saying he had seen the article online. A distant cousin asked if I was the same person mentioned in a business podcast interview. Even my Aunt Carol left a cheerful comment under one of my social media posts saying she was proud of how well I was doing. At first, it all felt a little strange. For years, my life had moved quietly without much attention from my relatives. Now suddenly people were reaching out with friendly messages and questions about my work. Then one evening I saw something that made me pause. My sister Lauren had sent me a message. The message was unusually warm. She said she had heard about my success and thought it was incredible. She mentioned how proud our parents were and how everyone had been talking about my achievements at a recent family dinner. That sentence caught my attention. A recent family dinner. Another gathering I had not known about. But this time, instead of feeling the familiar sting, I just stared at the message calmly. Years earlier, I might have asked about the dinner. I might have tried to understand why no one had mentioned it to me. Now I simply let the thought pass. Lauren's message ended with something else. She said the family had been meaning to invite me over for dinner soon. Everyone would love to catch up. I set my phone down on the table and sat there quietly for a few minutes. Because for the first time in years, invitations were finally starting to appear. But they were arriving only after my life had changed. Only after my career had become successful enough to attract attention. And deep down, a quiet thought began forming in my mind. Maybe my absence from those gatherings had never been accidental. But if that was true, then the sudden interest in reconnecting probably was not accidental either. And soon, one conversation would confirm exactly why my family had started reaching out again. The first official invitation came about 2 weeks after my sister's message. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was out in the backyard of my house trimming a few branches from a small maple tree I had planted the year before. The weather was cool, quiet, the kind of day where everything moves slowly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I pulled it out, I saw my mother's name on the screen. That alone felt unusual. For the past several years, our conversations had been short and occasional. A quick holiday message. A brief call on my birthday. Nothing more. But this time she had sent a longer text. She said the family was planning a dinner the following weekend. Nothing fancy, just everyone getting together at my parents' house. She wrote that it had been far too long since they had seen me and that everyone would love for me to come. I read the message twice, because something about it felt strange. Not the invitation itself. Families invite each other to dinner all the time. But the tone of the message was unusually warm, almost careful. I leaned back in my chair on the porch and thought about it for a few minutes. Years earlier, I probably would have accepted immediately. Back then I had still been trying to stay connected. I had still been hoping things would return to the way they used to be. But now the situation felt different. Not because I was angry. Strangely, I was not angry at all. The years of distance had quietly drained most of that emotion away. What remained was something calmer. A kind of quiet clarity about how things had unfolded. Still, I eventually replied. I told her I would stop by for dinner. The following weekend, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in months. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. The same quiet street. The same trees lining the sidewalks. Even the old mailbox in front of the house still leaned slightly to one side. When I walked inside, something immediately felt different. Everyone was unusually welcoming. My father greeted me at the door with a long handshake that turned into an awkward half-hug. My sister Lauren smiled brightly and asked about my work before I had even taken off my jacket. Even my brother Kevin, who had always been quiet around me, seemed eager to talk. The whole evening had a strange energy. People asked questions about my projects, about the company, about the house I had bought. At one point, my Aunt Carol mentioned that she had read the magazine article and told everyone how impressive it was. The compliments kept coming. I answered politely, but part of me simply observed the room, because something about the attention felt unfamiliar. For years, during family gatherings, I had mostly blended into the background. Conversations had rarely centered around me. Now suddenly, everyone seemed deeply interested in my life. Dinner lasted several hours. Eventually, the conversation shifted away from work and back to casual family topics. That was when my father said something that made the entire evening suddenly make sense. He leaned back in his chair and said the family had been talking recently. He said they had all realized that it had been a mistake letting everyone drift apart. Then he added one quiet sentence. He said that now that I was doing so well, it was important for the family to stay close. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was impossible to miss. And in that moment, I finally understood why the invitations had suddenly started appearing again. After my father said that, the room went quiet for a moment. Not an awkward silence exactly, but the kind where everyone seems to be waiting to see how someone will react. I kept my expression neutral and took a sip of water. For years I had imagined what it might feel like if my family suddenly wanted to reconnect. Back when the distance first started, I probably would have been relieved. I might have felt grateful that things were finally returning to normal. But sitting there at that dinner table, I mostly felt calm. Because by that point, my life had already adjusted to the distance. I asked my father what he meant. He shrugged slightly and said that families go through phases. People get busy with work, life moves quickly, and sometimes everyone drifts apart without realizing it. My sister nodded in agreement. She said the family had been talking about how they needed to make more of an effort to spend time together again. She said it was important to stay connected. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. But there was one detail that none of them seemed to mention. The drifting had not been mutual. For years they had continued gathering together. They had simply stopped inviting me. I did not say that out loud. Instead, I asked a simpler question. I asked when the family had started talking about reconnecting. My mother answered this time. She said it had come up a few weeks earlier during another family dinner. Apparently, someone had mentioned the article about my work. That led to a longer conversation about how successful I had become. Then someone said they had not seen me in a long time. That was when they decided it would be nice to invite me again. The explanation was delivered so casually that it almost sounded normal. But the timeline was clear. For years my absence had gone mostly unnoticed. The concern appeared only after my success became visible. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the table. Everyone seemed relaxed. No one appeared uncomfortable. To them, the situation probably felt like a simple reunion. A family reconnecting after some time apart. But inside my head, something very different was happening. Pieces of the past were quietly rearranging themselves. The missed invitations. The vague explanations. The sudden warmth once my life improved. For the first time, the entire pattern made sense. My absence had not been a problem. Not until my life became something worth paying attention to. Eventually, my brother Kevin spoke. He said something that sounded almost like a compliment. He said it was impressive how well I had done for myself without much help from anyone. He meant it as praise. But those words revealed something else. They reminded me that during all those years when my life was still uncertain, the family had not been particularly interested in staying close. Now suddenly the door was open again. Dinner eventually came to an end. As people gathered their coats and said their goodbyes, my mother walked with me to the front door. She told me they hoped I would start coming around more often again. I smiled politely and told her I would think about it. But as I drove home that night, one quiet question stayed in my mind. If someone only remembers you once your life becomes successful, what exactly do they really want from you now? Over the next few weeks, the invitations kept coming. At first it was small things. My sister Lauren sent a message asking if I wanted to join the family for Sunday lunch. My Aunt Carol invited me to a small birthday dinner for one of my cousins. My mother called twice just to ask how work was going. If someone had looked at the situation from the outside, it might have seemed like a normal family reconnecting after a period of distance. But the pattern was impossible for me to ignore. For years I had been quietly excluded from gatherings that continued without me. Now suddenly I was included again. Not gradually. All at once. I accepted a few of the invitations out of curiosity more than anything else. Each dinner followed the same strange rhythm. At first, everyone was warm. People asked about my projects. They asked how the company was growing. They asked about the house I had bought. The questions were friendly, but they were also very specific. Almost practical. Eventually, the conversations always shifted in the same direction. One evening, my cousin Daniel mentioned that he had been thinking about changing careers. He asked if my company might be hiring engineers or project managers. Another night, my Aunt Carol casually brought up a business idea she had been considering. She wondered if I might be interested in investing. My brother Kevin asked if I knew anyone who could help him get a better position at the company where I worked. None of these requests were aggressive. No one demanded anything directly, but the pattern was clear. Each gathering slowly turned into a conversation about opportunities, about connections, about ways I might help someone move forward. I answered politely whenever possible. Sometimes I offered advice. Sometimes I explained that certain things were outside my control. But as the weeks passed, the real reason behind the sudden warmth became impossible to ignore. They were not reconnecting with me because they had missed me. They were reconnecting because my life had become useful. One evening confirmed it more clearly than anything else. I had stopped by my parents' house for another dinner. After the meal, most of the family had moved into the living room to talk. My father sat down beside me on the couch. He spoke quietly, like he was offering practical advice. He said that success changes how people see you. When someone does well in life, family members naturally want to stay close. Then he added something else. He said that helping each other was what family was supposed to do. His tone suggested that what he was saying was completely obvious. But those words echoed strangely in my mind. Because during all the years when I had been building my life quietly, the idea of staying close had not seemed nearly as important. By the time I drove home that night, I finally understood something I had been slowly realizing for months. My absence from the family had never been the problem. My lack of success had been. And now that my life looked different, my place in the family suddenly looked different too. The only question left was what I was going to do about it. For a while, I did nothing. I kept attending a few dinners here and there. I listened to the conversations. I answered questions about work, projects, and business opportunities. I watched the way everyone interacted now that my life looked different from what it had been years earlier. The strange thing was that no one ever mentioned the past. No one brought up the gatherings I had never been invited to. No one acknowledged the long stretch of time when I had quietly disappeared from family dinners and celebrations. It was as if those years had simply been erased. Instead, everyone behaved as if the family had always been close. At first, I wondered if I should bring it up. I imagined asking the question directly. Why did no one invite me for all those years? But every time the thought crossed my mind, I realized something important. I already knew the answer. Success changes how people see you. My father had said those words casually, almost like a compliment. But the more I thought about them, the clearer they became. When my life had been ordinary, my absence had not mattered. When my life became successful, suddenly my presence was valuable again. One evening my sister Lauren called me. She sounded cheerful and asked if I wanted to come over the following weekend. The family was planning another dinner, and everyone hoped I would be there. For a moment I did not answer. I looked around my living room. The house was quiet. On the table beside me sat a stack of project plans for a new facility our company was designing. My phone buzzed again with a message from a friend asking about a hiking trip we were planning. My life was full, peaceful, stable. The strange thing was that the family dinners no longer felt necessary. They felt optional. I told Lauren that I might not be able to make it that weekend. Work was busy, and I already had other plans. She sounded disappointed, but she said they understood. After the call ended, I sat there for a while thinking about everything that had happened over the past few years. The missed invitations, the quiet distance, the sudden return of warmth once my life improved. I realized something simple. For a long time I had been trying to find my place inside the family. But during the years when they gathered without me, I had built something else. A life that did not depend on their approval or their invitations. And that life had turned out to be stronger than I expected. Over time I still saw my family occasionally. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional dinner. But the dynamic had changed permanently. I was no longer chasing my place at their table. If I attended, it was because I chose to. If I stayed away, my life continued just the same. And in a strange way, that quiet distance taught me something important. Sometimes the moment people finally remember you is the same moment you realize you no longer need them to.